Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the, I think, the best session of Davos for this year. And it's only a great session because we are talking about a great place, and that's the African continent. And we have an opportunity this afternoon to talk on a topic which is very dear to all of us, and a great opportunity also to put our thoughts together on rethinking Africa's growth strategy. And to help us do that, we have a great panel today. We have with us His Excellency President Kikwete from Tanzania. We have next to him the President of the African Development Bank, Donald Kaberuka, and I'm under strict instructions from him that I'm only allowed to call one person on this panel President. But I'm only allowed, Mr. President, to call you.
The other one is corporate.
Yeah, I'm only allowed to call you President, otherwise Donald will never speak to me again. We have Mr. Ruogu, who's the Chairman and President of the Export-Import Bank of China, and next to him, Kuseni Dlamini, who's the CEO of Old Mutual South Africa. And at the end of the panel, but by no means the least important, because we all depend on his organization for a lot of our capital funding requirements, Russell Lopesha. So without further ado, let me just make one or two short opening comments, and then, Mr. President, I will turn to you to start the discussion. Many of you will probably have seen the IMF's latest World Economic Outlook. And you'll have noted from the World Economic Outlook that they make the point in the World Economic Outlook that although Africa, like every other part of the world last year, has experienced a significant slowdown as a result of the collapse in global trade and the financial market crisis, and we saw growth in Africa decline from an average of 6%, which it had experienced between 2004 and 2008, to 1.75% in 2009, it is expected to accelerate in 2010 to over 4%. Now, what is significant about that is that there are essentially three parts of the world where we expect to see strong, solid growth for next year, and that's China, India, and the African continent. And of course, the difference between us and China and India is that in Africa we have a whole continent with a number of different countries growing significantly more than the average of 4%. But Africa has made significant progress across a number of important areas, whether that's in fiscal policy and fiscal balances, in bringing inflation down, in achieving significant progress in infrastructure and in governance. That doesn't mean to say that there aren't many challenges ahead. And in this afternoon's session, we have the opportunity to explore both the opportunities and the challenges. And I can think of no better person to lead us in that part of the discussion but you, Mr. President. So your country's made remarkable progress under your leadership, and perhaps you can give us some sense of how you see a new growth strategy for Africa, given what we have just been able to achieve.
Well, thank you, Maria. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to start. You know, as a politician, we always look things from a political perspective. But let me say, as the introduction to this discussion topic has been put by World Economic Forum, that indeed Africa's growth has been changing for the better since the 1990s. The economies of most African countries have registered strong macroeconomic performance, unlike in the past. And the other good thing about it is that it has been sustained over the last 2 decades. Of course, unfortunately, of recent, African economies have been experiencing stresses and strains. 2007, high oil prices, high food prices. And then 2008, the unprecedented economic crisis. Of course, these have threatened to reverse some of the gains that, or the major gains that Africa has made over the last 2 decades. Of course, in view of that, of course, there is need for rethinking of Africa's growth strategy. And I don't think there is need for making too many strange inventions about it. What I can say really, because for the brevity of time, is let me go straight to what I think could be the policy action going forward. First, of course, African countries should try as much as possible to stay the course of sustaining macroeconomic stability, because macroeconomic stability has done so much for us. We have the strength that we have now because of the strong macroeconomic stability. Of course, the second thing that I would propose is adopt more effective ways of exploiting Africa's natural resource comparative advantage. We have abundance of resources, minerals, forest land, wildlife, tourism, and so on. Our biggest challenge is more effective ways of exploiting those resources. Particularly, I have 2 things to mention. One is ensure that a substantial or a sizable part of the revenues remain on the continent to promote development on the continent. And the second is create the necessary linkages with other sectors, the backward and forward linkages, because we have experience. We have a mining sector, for example, in Tanzania, and at times there's some come and invest in hotels. They import the water. They would import the food. So you have an activity there has no linkages to the rest of the economy. So that's why I'm saying adopt more effective ways of exploiting Africa's resources. At least source the services locally. What can be sourced locally? So there are times when even the services for dump trucks to move the ore from the pits to the treatment plant are outsourced. So when you get to this kind of situation, then there are no linkages to the economy. So this is. Of course, the third thing I would propose is increase investment in infrastructure development. Ensure that there are adequate financial resources for investing in roads, ports, railways, energy, water, telecommunications, etc. Because this will boost the productive capacity and reduce poverty as more and more people access basic social and economic services. The fourth thing I would suggest is invest in agriculture. Agriculture is everything in Africa. 80% of the people, 70% to 80% live in the rural areas. They depend on agriculture for their livelihood. So promoting growth in the agricultural sector is important for food security. And with the ample land that Africa has, there is food security, there is food for Africa, and Africa can also help feed the rest of the world. It's important for promoting growth and also for fighting poverty. That's it. The fifth thing that I would propose, invest in human capital development. Invest in education so as to train the human resource on the continent. We've done a lot, but we need to do more. And most of our countries have concentrated on universal primary education, and this is the MDG. But I'm saying we have got to go beyond primary education. Primary education is literacy education. But the kind of education that can create a middle class has got to be secondary education and above. And in that, of course, due regard should be given to science education. Well, the last thing I would propose is promote regional integration. Regional integration is essential for underpinning Africa's growth. We'll promote greater inter-African trade, thus reducing African countries' vulnerability to global markets. Well, for the beginning, let me mention those. But as we continue, we will continue to talk about more and more things. There is a lot more to say, but let me say that for now.
Thanks, Mr. President. I think that's quite a significant list, and I think quite an important list. And Donald, perhaps if I can turn to you and just ask you to pick up on the role of the ADB in development, because the ADB plays an absolutely critical role. I know from my previous life, President Kikwete always used to give me a hard time about infrastructure development, that we weren't doing enough and we weren't joining up the continent sufficiently. And the ADB has a particularly important role to play in that regard.
Yeah. But thank you very much. I think as President Kikwete said, you have a period of 2000, 2008, when we are the second fastest growing continent after Asia. We have the highest rate of growth in 30 years. Of course, income growth comes a bit later. That's obvious. Now, what this crisis has done has been to interrupt it momentarily, but it has not stopped it. And what is shown is our vulnerability to commodity dependence and limited economic integration. So the president is absolutely right. And how we look at the bank is to say booms and busts in the commodities will be there all the time. We need to look at how to take advantage of this market of 1 billion people, 1 billion Africans. I'm not talking about political integration, Mr. President. That's more complicated. I'm talking about economic integration. And that's... I understand. This is why we see our mission
I agree.
is promoting economic integration, the power pools, the corridors, and over the last 3 years we've done quite a lot of that. Number two, I think another thing the crisis has demonstrated is perhaps a part of the rethinking we have to look at. I invited Stiglitz to the bank the other day to talk to my staff, and he went on at some length about the balance between the state and the market. In this rethinking, it might as well be that we have to look at how to give the state, not the old type of the state, but the different states some role in terms of pushing some of the things we do. We are a development bank, wholly owned by the states of Africa and some non-African states. We have been able to go from $5 billion a year to around $11 billion, 60% of which is infrastructure. We're doing about $1 billion a year on economic integration projects. And I think we need to do more so that when the next crisis comes, find that our internal market has been growing, the cost of doing business have come down, because now with limited power and roads and all this, you're adding 40% to our cost of production. And so we are concentrating the fire before the crisis and after the crisis on the kind of things which the President just mentioned: economic integration, infrastructure, and of course, the promotion of the private sector. Now, on the rebalancing between the state and the market, I don't think this is something new. All of us knew that from one extreme to the other, now there is a case to rebalance. And one example comes to my mind. This is the role of the national development institutions. National development institutions. In the past, some of them were badly governed. There was a governance problem. Political loans, bad management, and all this. But that is another problem. But I think we need to find out how to enable the state to fill the savings gap in order to be able to drive some of these projects I'm mentioning. Another thing, of course, is to look again at the way we enable countries to borrow money on the capital markets. 2 years ago, Ghana went to the market, borrowed $800 million. to be the power projects and railways. I think, Mr. President, your country has been considering doing the same. I think Kenya and Zambia have been thinking of doing the same. Now, that experience, even by itself, is extremely important. And so as we improve our business environment, we get better investment grade, I think it would be important for our countries to get the experience of going to the capital markets.
You know, I want to follow up on what you're saying, because it is about accessing the capital markets. I think that's all very important. One of the things that that sometimes happens is that we have a very rich pipeline of infrastructure projects, and it is both about access to capital, but it is also about resolving the issues across borders. Sometimes it's about getting the projects to market, as it were, and sometimes we do it fantastically well in the way that we have done the CCOM project. That's been done and sealed and delivered. Some cases we don't, and if you look at competitiveness in our continent, when it comes to infrastructure, we really aren't doing as well as we need to do. You see a lot of these projects. Where is the fault line, and how do we deal with it?
Marie, I think the picture is changing. During this crisis, we have seen an avalanche of pipeline of projects coming to us. I can see us from IFCs here, the same for the FC. An avalanche of infrastructure projects, from power to railways, airports, and of course, information communication technology. What we have done was to say, it's not for us to finance all this, but we crowd in the investment. Maybe an investment is worth 10 billion, we put in 1 billion, and we enable people to join us. We have created something called the African Financing Partnership, where we link up different financial institutions, and we identify an opportunity, mainly in infrastructure, and we bring in partners from other parts of the world, and it is beginning to work very, very well.
Mr. Lee, China has been a very important part of the African landscape now for a long time. So it's not a thing of the last 10 years, although its visibility has increased for the last 10 years, both in terms of trade and infrastructure. Are there things we can do and we learn from China's own development strategies and approaches?
Thank you, Maria. I think what I can offer at this stage for African development is from the Chinese experience. I think it is very important for Africa to put the development as the first priority. Without development, I don't think can solve other issues. Sometimes you have to first have development, then you solve the Medicare, education, sanitation, all these issues. Sometimes it's difficult to make it simultaneously happen. So development, economic growth is the first priority. Second advice I would say is you have to increase the savings so as to increase investment. The investment must be concentrated on, I think, two sectors. One is the agriculture. I think the president of Tanzania mentioned that. The agriculture is the basis for economic development, and so provide the basic needs of the people, the food, the clothes, all these things. So the agriculture is crucial. I don't think the African countries use their very limited foreign chain to import food. That is really a waste resources. I think Africa has the good land, good people, and good weather. You have to develop your agriculture sector, make yourself sufficient for agriculture supply. And the second sector is the infrastructure. It's also mentioned by the previous speakers. I think without infrastructure, it is impossible for economic opportunities become materialized. And I have been traveled in Africa quite a lot, maybe 35 countries so far in 3 years. So I have an intensive kind of experience talking to the leaders and the ministers, the peoples, and the companies in Africa. I think they all emphasize on the infrastructure development. But the things you have to make them happen. You cannot always talk. This is important, let us invest. You have to make a concrete plan to fulfill that plan year by year, and day by day, month by month. And if you look at Africa, you have not to have a railway network, highway network, air route network. The ports, seaports are not sufficient. No capacity of handling. You know, there's a lot of infrastructure needs in Africa. So emphasize on the infrastructure development. That's our experience. You know, we in China say, if we want to be wealthier, to build the road first. So I think that's why we think it is important. And lastly, I think it's the international community has to make the commitment to make more investment in Africa. I don't think the borrowing is a problem. I think the problem is how you make the borrowing effective. So, you know, because previously Africa has debt issues, and then you do not allow the African countries to borrow, you say because it's not the debt sustainable. But the problem is not the debt itself. The problem is how to use these borrows. If you make the borrowings effective economically, then you generate a capacity to repay. Why you should have fear of borrowing? And China has more than 400 billion foreign debts, but we have 2.4 trillion reserves. You know, it's without borrowing, without development, without the capacity for repay. So I don't think that the so-called debt sustainability issue is an issue. You know, you have to make the borrowing effective. So China has already done its part. In the last 3 years, from 2006, 2007, 8, and 9, China, the Exim Bank made 5 billion concessional facilities to African countries. In the last meeting between China and Africa in Egypt, our Premier Wen Jiabao announced another 10 billion concessional facilities to the African countries. And we finished the 5 billion in 3 years. We are going to finish this 10 billion in next 3 years. So we already made our commitment materialize. I think the whole world, all the international community members should also do the same. And then Africa can develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Russell, if I want to turn to you and ask you to comment on the issue of regional integration from a capital markets point of view, because we're talking about infrastructure, and part of that infrastructure is the infrastructure of our capital markets, in our financial sector as well. And you, as the head of the JSE, have an important role to play in that integration.
Thank you, Maria. Let me make 4 points, if you don't mind, directly related to this issue. The first one being the study that I personally make of the mood, the flavor of the day, or the flavor of the week of Davos every year. This is my 13th Davos. And certainly one of the flavors this week is banker bashing. And frankly, to me, it's become a bit boring. I don't think it serves any purpose. And I wish that the Davos community would just lift the debate and get past this banker bashing that seems to be so popular at the moment.
I'm sure the bankers in the audience would all be very happy.
Yeah, because
I didn't pay you to do that, right?
Yeah, well, not enough. Yeah. And memories, I find, tend to be short and sometimes by design. My first divorce was in '99, and those of you who were here in '99 will remember that if you didn't understand the internet already intimately, and if you weren't already into the internet in every way, socially, business-wise, well, then you just lost it. You were passé. You obviously wouldn't be around next year. That was '99. 2000, you couldn't find anybody who the previous year was into the internet because we'd had the dot-com crash. And the concept, the internet, the dot-com crash, in principle, is no different to what we've just seen with the GFC. No, in concept, no difference whatsoever. People also got hurt. People lost a lot of money. Only difference is the scale. The scale with the GFC is a lot bigger. It pushed the whole entire world to the precipice, and that's why it gets so much attention. But in concept, no difference whatsoever. So let's just move on from this banker bashing. Banks are absolutely essential to the entire process. Must there be changes? Yes, of course there got to be changes. When an aircraft crashes, and an aircraft is no different in principle to a bank, and it's pilot error, you change the pilot. Maybe the pilot has been automatically changed, that's true. You don't say, well, no more big aircraft. We're only not allowing aircraft to be anymore, or it's only small aircraft that are allowed to fly. We get on with life. So that's my first observation of that aspect of the financial market. Second one, Africa is busy doing its bit as far as fixing up what has to be fixed. And there was a lot to be fixed. First one to acknowledge that. And in the latest Global Competitiveness Report, we have started getting recognition for that. South Africa's ranked second in the world, second out of 133 companies for securities market regulation. That certainly wasn't always the case. In fact, we were at the exact opposite side of the spectrum, say 15 years ago. But typical South African style, we got stuck in. We knew what the problem was. We identified the problem. We haven't fixed all the problems, but we got stuck into it and we fixed it exactly the same way that we have got stuck into the World Cup that we'll be hosting in June, July. The World Cup will take place. It'll be a fantastic success for Africa, in South Africa. Those of you who haven't got your tickets yet, you're not as smart as I thought that you all are, and you're missing a hell of a good opportunity. Third point, Africa's financial markets are starting to work better together. This regional cooperation, integration that a number of my colleagues talked about previously, it will happen more and more because it just makes sense, and it's so easy to do nowadays. Every time it involves technology, it doesn't mean that a particular country doesn't have to have its own financial markets. On the contrary, each country must have its own financial markets, but they don't have to duplicate everything that exists in the country next door. And you can do that very easily by means of technology without sacrificing any of your sovereignty. Last point. The regulated markets in the GFC, the regulated, transparent markets, did what they were supposed to do in the GFC. That's what they're there for throughout the world. Some of them have made mistakes. That's true. Mistakes induced by panic. That's one of the things South Africa didn't do. I guess that's why we got the credit for that in the ratings that came out in the Global Competitiveness Report. But basically, the regulated securities exchanges did what they have to do. South Africa is a particular case where we desperately, as a country with running a deficit on the current account of the balance of payments, we need capital inflows. our markets helped us bring in a total of 100 billion rand last year, 75 billion from the equities market, 25 billion from the bond market. Foreign flows that we desperately need if we're running, and are still running, a deficit on the current account of the balance of payment. Know that the financial markets, Maria, are not the economy. Understand that very clearly. We know what our function in the game is, but we know that we fulfill a very crucial greasing of the wheels function in the greater economy. Thanks.
Thanks, Russell. Kuseni, both the President and Mr. Lee made the point that we need savings in order to finance investment. You have taken over the Old Mutual, and savings is an important part of the equation. What are your views on the key elements of development? And one of the missing links on our continent is to increase the savings rate. How do you see the role of our institutions, financial institutions, in this equation, and more broadly?
Thank you very much, Maria. I think savings have got a huge role to play in terms of driving growth in Africa. My company is actively involved in South Africa, for example. We've got an infrastructure fund, we've got a housing fund, and we're involved in a number of investments in the so-called non-traditional areas. We invest in supporting entrepreneurs in the taxi industry through partnerships with other players in that industry. We also invest in commercial developments in townships. But the point that I would like to raise in terms of this topic that we're discussing here today, I just want to pick on the points that have been made by President Kikwete, Donald, and Lee. President Kikwete mentioned the issue of education. I think there's a great opportunity for us to unleash the knowledge potential of Africa. The challenge is really to try and increase the knowledge intensity of our economies. We need to go beyond just focusing on secondary education, but go to the extent of setting specific targets for graduates at universities. We must have targets for PhDs, engineers, financial experts, and across the field. I think that's what's going to help us. We are lucky that we have got resource-rich economies by and large. We need to use our resources to try and unlock the human potential of the African continent. The second point that I'd like to raise relates to some of the discussions that are taking place here in Davos around this broader subject of climate change. I think from an African perspective, we should really see this as an opportunity for us to unleash a green industrial revolution in Africa. We missed out on the first industrial revolution. We missed out on the green agricultural revolution that Mr. Lee spoke about, which took place in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Asia. We have missed out on the digital revolution. We have got one of the lowest penetrations in terms of ICT on the continent. I think that's not a problem. It's an opportunity. We need to put in place the right plans, the right initiatives to try and improve the ICT penetration in Africa. There is also the area of looking at biofuels. It's a great area of opportunity, looking at green energy opportunities. I mean, again, linked to the climate change issue. That's an area of massive opportunity. There are also other factors that are so important for us to look at, such as the issue of capacity. We have all the resources that we require to be a first world country in Africa, but we do not have the requisite capacity at local government level, national government level, and at continental level. And this does not just apply to government. I dare say it applies to the private sector. How many companies come from Africa? Are they in the top 100 in the FTSE 100 or in Wall Street, in Fortune 100? I think the challenge for us is to look at growing economic giants, multinationals that are homegrown in Africa, that can take their rightful place in the global economic space. I think we've got all what it takes. We have got the leadership capacity. Earlier on, President Zuma, at the lunch that he held for South Africans who are here at Davos, was challenging us for being too humble at times. And I think maybe we need to change our mindset and have a culture of winning, develop the killer instinct. Just like we see the Asians are doing. You go to India, you look at China, the work ethic, the entrepreneurial spirit that you see there. It's really something that I believe Africa can and indeed must try and learn from. The other point that is important it's not a new point, it's been mentioned before, is foreign direct investment. We still need to focus on a big push in creating environments that are conducive to foreign direct investment. In 2008, we had $87.6 billion in FDI going into Africa. And compared to other regions and other countries in the world, we can certainly do better because we are far behind in terms of that.
Mr. President, Kuseni raises an important issue in relation to the environmental revolution as such. Are we as a continent missing an opportunity? We're looking at the outcome of Copenhagen, and there was, I think, in the end, President Zuma was able to put a deal and to work with Brazil, China, and India on a deal that actually helped to put something on the table in Copenhagen and save the day, as it were. But we can either look at the challenges posed by the climate change challenge and debate as an opportunity, or as just an enormous challenge and cost for our continent. Are we looking at it from the right perspective? Because if we look at China is looking at it as an opportunity for a new development path.
There are two of us here.
I know, but I'm looking at you first.
Well, Maria, of course, the climate change is a major factor in our lives. We, of course, again, through the process of development, we landed ourselves into this problem. How do we reduce carbon emissions? How, of course, we are saying that those who are responsible for the emissions should also be responsible for the cleaning of the global environment. Our expectation in Copenhagen was we are going to develop consensus and come up and with something that all of us can call the way forward. I'm not sure if we got there. I think in February or later this month. Probably the consultations will go on. So it is itself a challenge, a threat, in fact, because we are beginning to feel, for us, Mount Kilimanjaro snow is fast disappearing. Sea levels are rising. We have one island that has already been submerged. We have towns along the coast where we have to incur huge cost of adaptation, to erect walls to prevent these towns from being taken over by the sea. Seasons have changed. For the past 3 years, we have had very severe drought, both Kenya and Tanzania. This year, we have rains that have come with vengeance, destroying the infrastructure. So we have these as problems. Of course, then from that perspective, definitely it's a major challenge. Of course, the only thing that we could look at as an advantage is Africa has, I'm told, 670 million hectares of forest. We have the carbon sink. We can do carbon trading. Well, but I can assure you, it is so difficult to access these facilities. We have discovered at home that the local people who are conserving forests find it so difficult to be recognized. You have to have somebody from the developed countries to work with you in order to have those benefits. So I really don't know what to answer you. There are obvious advantages that we can access, but they're so difficult to access. There are people who go into clean energies like wind energy. Those who work with companies from Europe or have partners from Europe get benefits. Those who invest locally find it so difficult. So I really don't know what is going on. There's something that is being said. You try to. It looks like a mirage. You try to chase it. It eludes you. So, but of course, definitely the important thing for us here, climate change is a serious phenomenon. All of us have got to work together, face the problem, face it, deal with it head on, so as to save the planet. We cannot go on the way we are now. We'll disappear like the dinosaurs have disappeared.
So it's a major challenge that we face. And Donald, isn't this where one of the key pillars of the ADB, which is to build a knowledge bank, where the ADB can play an important and needs to play an important role in terms of facilitation? The President's talking about carbon trading. It is a complex area. It's a complex area even in developed markets. Should we be doing more? It is a challenge to all of us.
Sure. But Maria, can I come to complement what President Kikwete said? The Africans went to Copenhagen with a clear position, concentrating on adaptation and development of clean energy. Because it was important to give this concept of common but differentiated responsibilities a meaning. From the way we look at it ourselves, this continent of Africa, that is, it has enough hydro potential to develop its power. It is true, this hydro potential is not well distributed. 70% of Africa's water resources for that purpose are probably in about 6-7 countries. But this is how regional integration comes in. We're able to do that if the resources were available. This is why I find people linking up with China, with the capital markets, to develop these dams. Just before Copenhagen, we had in the bank applications from 2 countries to develop coal-fired plants. I had no hesitation in my mind that this was the right thing to do. That was before Copenhagen. Because this is a country with the least per capita availability of energy. And therefore, I think for us, the narrative must be adaptation, development of clean energy, we have the potential, and I think with the understanding in the world about differentiated responsibilities, I think we're able to contribute. So we are looking at all forms of energy, traditional renewables, to be able to ensure that our countries have enough energy for their development. Look at the crisis almost across all countries in Africa in 2007, where almost every African country was facing energy problems, from small businesses to large businesses. You can't run an economy like that. And so for us, we look at development of energy as the principal problem inside the whole area of dealing with the climate framework. And we are playing a role in the bank. Now, coming to knowledge, I agree with you. We even have countries in Africa who don't come to us for money. Yeah, they have capital surplus. They come to us for knowledge products. And so we need to package that as part of the support we give them. But also we need to share knowledge about best practices, including the one you mentioned. And so we have 9 places at the bank, the Office of Chief Economist, which generates knowledge, disseminates knowledge, but also links up with the think tanks across the African continent to ensure that we have ability to generate our own thinking on different subjects. Because far too often in the past, thinking for us has been done from outside. And we have taken that thinking, owned it, and said it was ours. Now we want to be able to bring our own perspectives on the table, and you cannot do that if you're able to generate that kind of knowledge.
Well, let me turn to the audience who's been sitting very patiently, and I'm sure there are questions, ideas, inputs that people may have. We have time for, I think, three or four quick questions, and I want to recognize the lady in front, the gentleman over there, and over here, and then ask the panel to respond. You've got the floor. If you can just identify who you are and which organization you come from.
Okay, my name is Efrat Peled, and I'm the chairman of Arison Investment, which is one of the leading investment companies in Israel. I'm also a YGL, a young global leader. My question is, one of the things that has been in the background for a very long time was the fact that the Western world was exploiting Africa and the third world and the developing country during the years, especially by the large corporation. Now, I think something is changing in the large corporation, and the question is, if you want corporations that are working according to sustainable environmental, social ethics, what are you planning at the level of the governance and ethics to enable these companies to work in the continents? Because the environment in some of the countries are not the environment that allows you to work according to these kinds of ethics.
Okay.
So that's my question.
Right, gentleman on that side, and I think. Oh, Nancy. Okay.
My name is Kola Kareem. I run Shoreline Energy International, Nigeria. Also a young global leader. This question to Ruogu. Can you explain to us what China's labor policy on the continent of Africa is? What we have seen over the last couple of years are, yes, lots of Chinese investment, which is in turn driving growth on the continent, but the return position of those Chinese corporates coming into Africa is bringing their own labor force, which is in turn taking jobs away from Africans. That's one. On the climate change area, on the question you put earlier, and this is to Donald, what we have seen, we're in the power business on the continent, and what we have seen is when you come to donor agencies looking for funding for power projects, you get this terminology, people equating it, saying what is the carbon footprint and how green the power itself is. But we have a problem. Africa, to generate and drive growth on the continent, we're short of power. Europe and the rest of the world has built its business and its corporate culture on dirty energy, so to say. Now they're going green. But why is Africa's time, where we need that power to drive growth, why is there a timeline being put around you have to go green at the same time? I think this is a fundamental slowdown on the growth of our continent. Let us enjoy the dirty power first, like Europe and the developed world have, and then we can now go green at the same time. Thank you.
Right, I think that's pretty clear.
This is as much two comments as a question, if I may. The first comment is what a pleasure it is actually to hear this kind of discussion that the participants, the actors have made today. It's a big contrast to 4 or 5 years ago in Davos, when everything about Africa was about the donors and about charity and about the Millennium Development Goals, which I think are a good idea, but it cannot be the entire story. And so it was really a pleasure to hear the nature of this discussion. But I did want to ask both Mr. Lee and President Kaberuka, Mr. Kaberuka and President Kikwete about how you see you can make progress on the regional integration issues, both from the side of Chinese investment and within Africa. Just reminding, I know all of you know that sub-Saharan Africa is very small as an economy. It's smaller, just a little bit bigger than the city of Chicago as an economic unit. So the integration that you've referred to and Maria referred to is so fundamental. But where do you see it going in terms of the role of the African Union, the problem of the multiple trade agreements that you all cope with bilaterally and plurilaterally? What's the next step, and what can those of us in the development community do to push along in the direction that you're all trying to go on integration? What do you see are the big constraints where those outside should be fussing? Is it with the World Bank? Is it with the investment community? Is it with the financial community? Is it with the Chinese or not? Is it with the traditional donors?
Thanks, Nancy. I think we might take one more very quick question, if there is, and then we'll ask the panelists to answer. Right, gone. Russell, can I ask you, you in South Africa, sit on the King Committee on Corporate Governance. So can I ask you to attempt the question on corporate governance, and then any of the other panelists, if they want to say something? I know the question was broader than just pure corporate governance from a company point of view, but if you want to start.
Yeah, I think the answer to the lady's question is multi-dimensional, but let me just touch on a few issues. Certainly, as far as the listed environment is concerned, just to backtrack a little bit, all the ethics issues that you talked about that should be given attention to, I believe citizens of countries are primarily responsible for that. And I don't think we should rely on governments or agencies or this or that. That's what citizens are there for. Don't like what you're seeing by a particular company in your area, then that's your duty as a citizen to do something about it. Just to start there. From the listed environment point of view, which is what I'm involved in, we've taken particular care and trouble in South Africa to lift our game. We are on to our third code of corporate governance. The first one came out in 1994. We revised that in 2002, and we've just revised it again as the world changes and as the thinking of integrated reporting, as an example, and corporate governance as that changes, because that's a very dynamic thing. We have finished the work, and the new code will see the light of day this year. It's comparable with the best in the world. The listings requirements of companies, because that might be part of the answer to your question, and I do think the answer is multidimensional. There we've also lifted our game. We realized that in Africa and in South Africa, we were way behind the curve. That was 15 years ago. We're now right up top there with the best in the world, as far as a listings requirement point of view. I know the proper answer to your question goes a lot further, but maybe I should try and answer the other two questions.
Kuseni, I want to ask you also if you could comment on the corporate governance issue, because I know you've got views on that, and I know you've written one or two pieces on it before. So do you want to add anything?
Yes, Maria, thank you very much. I think ethics are very important in underpinning a globally competitive and efficient market system in Africa and elsewhere in the world. As Russell said, it's really ultimately up to the quality of leadership that you have in place. But I'll go further to say we also need to focus on putting in place the right institutions, right systems, and right processes. In South Africa, a lot of work has been done in terms of the codes of good corporate governance, But the cause on their own are not enough because they can just be a tick box exercise. But it's something that leaders in business, in government, in civil society have got to embrace and lead by example on.
Thanks. There were two questions, Mr. Lee. I know one was very specific on China's labor policy. So,
maybe on ethics.
Yeah, Mr. President.
Well, let me add, if the question of ethics is related to practice by governments or government officials in terms of being over bureaucratic, at times being corrupt, let me just say that Africa is a continent made of 53 countries. So the problems we have, if somebody goes to a country, he gets problems, he or she gets problems in that country, the conclusion is the whole of Africa is corrupt. So I think there's need to differentiate. There are countries where things are fine. There are countries where there are difficulties. So with that approach, then it is easy, other than demonizing all countries because you ran into a country or had difficulties, or even within that country, you bumped into an official who is corrupt, and then coming out. So I said these problems are there, but it is not typical of Africa. There are countries that are doing fine. There are countries that have difficulties. If you differentiate that, then you'll not be scared of dealing with Africa. Don't think every country. It's just like those who, because of lack of knowledge about Africa, because there is a problem in Darfur, then the whole Africa is a continent in crisis. So I think this is my humble request to you, my dear.
We have exactly 3 minutes left, and I want to ask that I'm going to give the three. There were two questions, so I just want to give the three panelists, and Mr. President, I'm going to give you the last minute. So the two other panelists, just 1 minute each, to maybe very, very quickly sum up and try and answer to do the impossible and answer the questions in your summing up comments, if you can. And apologies to the people who asked the question. The gentleman in the corner there has just pointed out the time is running out. Mr. Lee, very quickly.
Thank you, Maria. I think the question has to be answered in a very actually complicated way. The first, I think I forgot to mention the African countries have to choose their own development pattern. I don't think they can really follow the other countries' patterns because they are all different. And I don't think there is a so-called best models to follow. There's only most appropriate model for a specific country. So talking about particularly the labor policy, I think our loan programs do require the Chinese companies to hire as much as possible the local workers. But the story I heard from the Chinese companies are different, and I cannot generalize whether this is a common problem. First of all, the African workers normally do not work on the night shift. But in order to speed up the program, the Chinese companies always have 3 shifts a day to work on one road project or bridge project.
Mr. Lee, I'm going to have to ask you to end there because I'm going to have to skip Mr. Kaberuka and ask the President to just make a final comment. So apologies for that.
Okay.
First, my response, go dirty first, later go clean. I don't think is a wise thing. You know, destroying the environment, we are destroying our own habitat. If we are doing it now, we should follow the best practices, the best examples. We should not say go dirty first and then go clean because they started dirty. I wouldn't subscribe to that idea. Of course, about integration, I'm saying, how can we make progress? progress is being made. It is, right now we are at a stage where we have regional economic groupings that are busy with integration. SADC now is at the stage of preferential trade area. I think that they're working on that. The East African community has gone beyond the customs union, and now they are moving on to the stage of the common market. ECOWAS are now at a higher stage. I think they're now looking at how to open up the borders. The Maghreb doesn't have any regional economic grouping to talk about. The Central African have a regional economic grouping, but it is yet to find its strong feet on the ground. So at the continental level, of course, we are encouraging these regional economic groupings as building blocks to a larger economic integration of the continent. Of course, there are discussions about political integration. This is an economic forum. I don't want to bother you with the political integration part of it, but the thinking is, let's go for economic integration first, and then we look at political integration. But there are voices that want political integration now. So this is the debate that is going on. We have not yet concluded.
Well, Mr. President and the panelists, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I think you'll agree with me that we've had a very rich 1 hour of a very rich discussion about a great investment destination, a place that we love calling home, and we hope we have at least convinced those of you who are not yet investors that this is exactly where you should be investing. Thank you very much for your attention this afternoon.